Hello and welcome. I'm so excited to share this chat that I had with Erik. If you are someone suffering with addiction, or you're a family member or a loved one of someone who is suffering with addiction, you're not going to want to miss this. I talk with Erik about his Clear Health Technologies and their initiative and what they're doing. And what they're working on is going to change the addiction game forever. He's working on some real cool tools that are going to help people who are getting sober or into sobriety, help them stay there once and for all. So really, really cool. You're not going to want to miss that. And then afterwards, I talked to Erik about his experience of his loved ones suffering with addictions. He's gone through losses and he's gone through close family members who are suffering with addictions and understands what it's like. And he's got some great tips to help you if you're in that situation as well. Here, we want to show you what's possible in the world of sobriety. We introduce you to the various tools, programs, and resources available, because there are way more options than you may even realize. We want you to find the one that works for you.
And we do it through people who share their pathway to recovery and will help you find your path to freedom. Because getting sober can feel hard enough. You don't have to do it alone. I'm Sarah Roberts.
And I'm Roger Deveau, and this is Sobriety Starts Here. All right, Erik, I'm so excited to have you here. I first came across you through your Healing Addiction Summit, which was awesome work, by the way. Great stuff that you're doing there and real important work. And when I looked further into you, I discovered that you have your Clear Health Technologies business, and you're working on a really, really cool project through the Hero X Prize. Do you mind telling us briefly what that is?
So the Hero X project is called relapse. Well, it's called herox.com/relapse tech is the official URL for it. And so about a year and a half or 2 years ago, I started kind of thinking about the challenge around treatment and addiction, which is primarily that I've got family members and loved ones and talk to people. We go into treatment centers and we get clean, and the system seems to treat the solution for addiction and recovery as being clean or getting somebody clean. But the challenge and the monster that always showed up in my life and in my loved one's life was relapse. And, as a society and as a system, we are built to respond to relapse only when it's in a crisis state. So if you ask anybody what relapse is, they will say, well, when somebody's gone off the wagon, when they're in the ER, when they've totally crashed and so forth. And I agreed with that until I had an experience with my sister and my dad, where my sister, she's an OR nurse, she's been an ER nurse, and so she's really good at being a nurse, which sounds kind of silly when I say it that way, but she's a good nurse. And so my dad, who was 89 at the time and has since passed, we were playing cards, and he was playing cards, and she noticed that his left hand started to drop. And essentially what was happening is he was starting to go into a stroke. He didn't feel like he was going into a stroke. I didn't recognize that he was going into a stroke, but she said, Dad, you're having a stroke. I'm calling 911 right now. Because she knew what I call now whisper signs of a stroke are. And so instead of reacting in a crisis state where essentially he falls on the floor and dies in front of me, that would have been how I would have managed it, because I didn't know how to identify the early signs. Then she was able to identify the whisper signs. And so instead of him dying traumatically that night in front of us, we had another year with him. Now, he still had a stroke, and it was still something that we had to manage over that period of time. So then I started to think, the brain has started to say, here we come, as far as the stroke is concerned. So does the brain do the same thing with relapse? Does the brain say, at a certain point, hey, relapse, here we come? And what are the triggers around that? Can we measure that? And is that possible? So that was essentially the curiosity question that I had going into it. So, if you think about it fundamentally, we all know that we're starting to get hungry. We all know that we're starting to get tired. We all know that, our kids get hungry, our kids get tired, our friends, they get hangry, and we're like, grab a Snickers bar, whatever the case is, right? Entire advertising campaigns are built around this. But, we've never really figured it out or asked the question around addiction relapse. And so that was kind of my mission, was to get the answers to these questions. And I talked to people at Harvard. I talked to Nora Volkov, who is the director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse under the United States, the NIH. She's a neuroscientist for the last 30 years and the premier expert on addiction relapse in the brain. They've got $1 billion a year budget. And so the response I got back overwhelmingly was, you know what, probably, but we don't really know. But this is really important to find out, because I think you're on the right track. So that's how I came up with the initial idea around using wearables to identify relapse. So we've spent the last year and a half doing a lot of research, reading a lot of papers, talking to a lot of scientists, a lot of parenting experts, a lot of everybody. Not saying that, hey, we know what the prescription is, but asking the question of how do we get the data and the science and the information in a valid way so that we can say, we don't know what the answer is yet, but we have this huge pool of data to look at and say, now we know, right? And everybody gets hungry at different times. So the other question is, after I presented this, people started saying, well, once you identify relapse, then what, right? What do we do? Nobody really knew the answer to that question either, right? Do you eat? Do you exercise? Do you call 911? What do we do? And so like hunger, like stroke, the earlier you can identify, the less urgent the response needs to be, like the less dramatic the response needs to be. It could be just, if you know that I'm going into relapse and you get a signal on your phone saying Eric's starting to go into relapse, all he needs right now is just a phone call from you. Or all he needs right now is an emojicon. Yeah. Or all he needs right now is to do 5, air squats, right? Those are fundamentally the answers that are starting to rise to the top. The sooner we can, and therefore we, that awareness is, and mindfulness that you're actually, of knowing what your body is doing and saying at that time is hugely empowering. And to bring in your community and your support group around that to help you rally as well is also a huge key factor. So
I can only imagine the benefit of having people around you be able to come to your support, even just the power, if you don't even have a big support network, even just the power of you yourself getting that warning before it's already too late and getting to a safe place. Maybe it's just making sure you get home and making sure you get out of the situation you're in that may be pushing you towards, maybe it's a stressful situation that's triggering whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, imagine a world where we don't have relapse anymore. Wow. Right? I mean, relapse doesn't disappear, but crisis state relapse does, right? The consequence of not managing it properly does. And ultimately, we can heal as well, because there's neuroplasticity with the brain, which is scientifically proven. Everything that around functional medicine, around mindfulness, awareness, community, the scientific data is there. So we really can't say we don't know what to do anymore. The question is really, how does this all interplay so that we can find the perfect solution, right? What's the emotional and community and exercise and nutrition stack, if you will, that we need to put together for you? And the thing is, we can do it on an individual basis, because if you have a wearable that isn't necessarily a scarlet A, but a letter on your chest, but maybe a ring or something of that nature that is taking very, very detailed biometrics of your sleep patterns, and you can tie those biometrics into events in your life, I ate, I didn't eat, I was talking to this person, I drank and I didn't sleep well. And you can tie all those kind of triggers and all that, how everything is starting to respond to one another. You can learn about you personally, and therefore you can create a very specific plan and purpose around how your body and how your mind reacts in different situations, and learn how to manage that.
Wow. I mean, it's a complete game changer in the addiction world because it'll just change our entire understanding of what leads to these events. And I think that gives a lot of hope to anyone who's struggling with getting sober right now or worried that they won't be able to maintain it, that these solutions are coming. There are people like you who are working on these things to understand what they're going through and help give them solutions. So what is the goal right now that you have with the project that you're working on?
The goal is in the next 10 years to completely eradicate addiction relapse. And so the goal with the Hero X project and the independent studies that we're doing on our own as well is to essentially create a platform that we can gather data right around, and to have thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people participating in a collective data gathering, essentially experiment where everybody's data is coming in, because we're in the world of big data right now, and the data will not lie. Like I've got, I had a 2-year-old and he would sit up in front of the TV watching Aladdin or something, and he would be falling asleep with his his legs crossed, right? Just almost tipping over. And I would say, Gabe, are you tired? And he would say, I'm not tired. Obviously he was, right? But he was in denial. And the thing that people who suffer from addiction, they either can't recognize it or they become really good at hiding the pattern, or, the physical and the mental response. The thing is that, your pulse isn't going to lie, right? Your anxiety measurements are not going to lie about what you actually are experiencing and to what extent you're experiencing it. Some people may experience very, very dramatic responses to certain triggers, visual cues. There was Dr. Volkov did a test where I think people who were addicted to cocaine, she did a series of visual cues, and it was, fields and farms and, cities and so forth. And I think for, 1/100th of a second, like visually, you couldn't even see it. But she did a picture of a white flower. And she saw the brain responded to that. They got a dopamine hit just from that visual cue that they don't remember seeing and couldn't see like with the naked eye and remember, but the brain saw it, right? And so this is fundamentally what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a very, very, smart brain, right? But the brain will respond in ways that we don't know that it's responding, right? David Asprey will say, if you put your hand on a hot stove, your hand pulls back immediately. And that's not because you did it. It's because your body and your brain and the microbiomes within your body are intelligent, and they respond in certain ways that they've been trained to respond for your preservation.
Wow. I read a book from a Dr. A.K. Pradeep on the brain, and he's a neuroscientist that does a lot of, takes that knowledge and uses it to help companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi and that kind of thing market to people and get them to buy things
Oh yeah,
they might not have wanted them to buy. Sadly, that's where most of the money in brain research is right now, because there's a lot of money in it. But one thing that I read in that book stood out to me and really changed the way I look at everything. And it's why I truly understand the importance of people like you doing what you're doing. And that's at any given second, we have over 1 million bits of information coming in to our brain. So that's through sound, sight, touch, feel, temperature, all these bits of information coming in. But at any given second, with 1 million coming in, we can only consciously process about 140.
right.
And that's at an optimal level, 140. So 99.999% of the information coming in is automatically processed, like you mentioned with the picture, that we're not even aware of. And
Yeah.
things could be triggering and happening, that we have no clue to even look for.
Yeah. Really, and it's really those breadcrumbs that we want to learn from that we don't have access to right now on an individualized basis. Because you'll have people, you have 11.2% of all people who suffer from addiction right now in the US get into treatment to get clean, right? So that's just under 89% who don't even get access to getting clean or any kind of support. And then you have 70% safely who will relapse fully back into their addiction within 30 to 60 days, sometimes within a couple of hours of getting out of treatment after they have said absolutely 100%, I'm never doing this again. And they're fully committed and they believe it and they intend it. But what happens is the brain, they go back into the environment that they became addicted in.
Yep.
Right. And so it's all about visual cues. So if your mom or dad picks you up from your treatment center and they are the source of the trauma and the misunderstanding that is the pain, the source of the pain that you're trying to deal with, you will see them and your brain will immediately go, okay, we need to run from this thing and we need to find some way to cover up the pain that we're going to feel right now. So Dr. Gabor Mate says it's not a question of, why the addiction, it's really why the pain. And the brain is fundamentally, it's a survival tool, right? And it's trying to keep us from feeling pain and harm and suffering. And that's why, fundamentally it acts the way it does. And I interviewed on the summit, Kevin Briggs, who is known as the guardian of the Golden Gate Bridge. And I love telling this story because I think it's really important. But he said his beat was the Golden Gate Bridge. Have you heard of him?
No.
Yeah. So whenever somebody was on the other side of the rail on the Golden Gate Bridge to jump, he was called. And his job was to talk them down and get them to, without physically forcing them, to talk them into coming back over.
Wow.
Right. So over 20 years, he had 202 people that went on the other side of the rail that he was called for. 200 came back over.
Wow.
And so the reason I wanted to talk to him was I wanted to say, what does that conversation look like when you're dealing with somebody who is just basically given up all hope on life, who doesn't know what else to do? And he said, when somebody gets to that point, they essentially have three choices in their life. They can go to sleep to hide from the pain. They can do drugs or use something else to hide the pain for a short time, or they can kill themselves. And so when people become addicted for whatever reason, the brain has decided this is the solution to feeling better and surviving, right? And he only lost two. And he said, and this is very fundamental, I think, to long-term treatment and recovery, there was this kid named Jason that he interviewed, and Jason was about 26. I think I'm getting the name right. It might be wrong, but Jason said, have you heard of Pandora's Box, the story of Pandora's Box? And Officer Briggs said, why don't you tell me about it, Jason? So he went on to say Pandora's Box is a gift given to Pandora from Zeus with all the scourges of humanity in it, except for one thing. And, but Zeus, she didn't know that. And Zeus said, don't open it up. But she had curiosity. So she opened it up and all the scourges came out and she shut it, leaving one thing in there. So she released death, she released famine, she released hate. And then he said, do you know what that one thing was that she left in there that she ultimately released? And he said, what was it? And he said, it's hope. And he said, I can't find my hope. And at that point, he let go and disappeared and died. So fundamentally, what we do know is that if you have hope of a better future or hope of a better connection or hope, that's what's going to keep you driving. And so you have to be able to find that hope as well, because that releases certain chemicals in the brain that will want you to continue to strive and put forth the effort. And more often than not, that hope is typically tied to some kind of relationship in your life. So you have to create that new relationship, or find that relationship, or find that community that is going to support you in that effort around which you have hope.
Well, and one of the things I love about what you're doing as well is that I think that in itself can give hope to a lot of people, because what you're doing essentially is really creating a lot of data around understanding addiction and relapse and what that does, regardless of how many years it takes to get to the point of where you want to get. People's understanding, the more we let this information out, the more we understand it, the more people can deal with it in a better and healthier way. The people around us, society as a whole, the more information we have on understanding that it's more than just a choice that someone's made in their life. No one chooses to struggle with this type of thing. It's not a decision to go back to it. It's not a decision that I'm choosing this over a loved one or my family or my job. It's something deeper. And the more understanding we have on that, the better we can all deal with it. Those of us suffering with it and those of us around us who are trying to help us while we do. So if someone's watching this right now and they love the idea of what you're doing and they want to help, what
Mhm.
kind of people are you looking for to help you in this project, to help you collect this data?
Really good question. I think we're looking to build community. We're looking for family members and loved ones who are trying to support another loved one or friend who suffers from addiction. You have to be a willing participant for sure, because the data has to be structured in a certain way. You've got to be willing to have that data shared and put into a larger pool. It's not to say that we're going to publish your name and your profile and everything on social media, but we need access to the data. And so we're actually partnering, I can't say who it is with right now, but a really, really phenomenal wearable that is super cool. It's attached to a very strong platform, and we're also in final conversations with Johns Hopkins University, who's going to structure all the data science and the data management around it. Um, really, it's anybody who feels like they're suffering from any kind of addiction. I'll just leave it that wide open at this point. Yeah.
Yeah.
If it's food addiction or any kind of cravings, to be honest with you, it, it, I don't want to get too picky right now, because again, we're in the phase where we're trying to get the questions answered, right? And then once we have the data, then we can start prescribing and making projections and saying, these are the type of people that are going to be really helpful. We've got a very strong interest in with New York State with the county jail systems, because 80% of all inmates in the county jail systems in New York State and really throughout the country are suffering from heroin addiction. And so how do you support them and gather their personalized data while they're in the system? And then how do you support them once they're out to cut down on recidivism? So I would just say, if anybody has any curiosity, interest in the project, then you can certainly email me, and I would love to hear from you.
Perfect. And if they want to help you give data, but maybe they're nervous about what kind of data that would be, is there, if someone decides, hey, I want to support you and join this, is there a limit to what kind of data you need? Do they need to give a certain amount of information? Can they do different levels? What is it
Yeah,
that they can do?
really good questions, all of which we're in the final kind of stages
Yep.
of fine tuning right now. So I would say, once we are, and we're 90% there, we are fine tuning on exactly the type of data that we're trying to get, and what kind of check-ins and surveys and so forth we're going to need in that process. But it's all going to be super low key. It'll all be with, essentially a very simple wearable that'll be on your finger or your wrist, and it'll all be tied to your phone. So, it's going to be real. I mean, as an example, if you're getting an anxiety spike and we notice that, then the system would be notified and serve up a series of surveys right on your phone.
Mm.
And it'll really be that easy, right?
That's
So
amazing. I love that. And so if someone wants to follow the progress of this and keep in touch, is following the project at herox.com/relapse tech, I believe. Is that the best way to go?
no, the best way to go is going to be on go to clearhealthtech.com,
Mm-hmm.
and then we will post a blog with updates and also opt in for the for participating in the research study.
That's awesome. So I'll make sure that I post that below as well, so you can just click on it and go there to follow along. Now, I'd like to take a little bit of a different path with you for a few minutes. I know you don't have
Okay.
tons of time, but for
Oh,
those of us that are curious, um, can we learn a little bit more about you? What got you into this in the first place, and what has been your experience with addiction?
yeah, happy to share that. So I have, I used quite a bit in high school, and I never personally got addicted for whatever reason. But I have friends, family members who became addicted. I've got people who have committed suicide. I've got nieces and cousins that have been to jail, become drugstore cowboys. My sister is raising 3 of her daughter's children because she became addicted and has disappeared off the face of the earth. Nobody knows where she is, dead, alive. I've
Sorry to
seen
hear that.
personal trauma. And so and that may speak to why I'm taking the approach that I am, which is I have a lot of friends that and family members and loved ones who have suffered from addiction, but I come very much from the perspective of as a family member and loved one who just doesn't know what to do,
Yep.
right? Because you talk about all those people who go into treatment centers and then come out and don't know who are the groups that are trying to support these people who are suffering from addiction, right? It's family members and loved ones.
Yep.
What do they know? Almost nothing, right? And a lot of time in an effort to support and help, they're creating more stress and anxiety and trauma for the individual. And it's not on purpose. It's just they have no information, right? Too many people these days think that it's just a matter of choice and just choose better and you're a weak person. Well, fundamentally, at the end of the day, if you have a loved one who is suffering from addiction and you're listening to this, or you're suffering from addiction yourself, first of all, please accept my sympathies, and I'm sorry for any of the tough experiences that you're going through right now. But it is not because they are choosing badly. It's fundamentally a rewiring in the brain that has occurred, and their responses. Almost, Dr. Volkov says this is a disease of free will, right? Initially, yes, it is from bad choice, right? But after a certain point, if you look at cutting as an addiction, right? It is still an attempt to cover pain, and you'll get the dopamine boost, but still you're never going to get rid of those scars, right? And the same thing is happening every time you take a hit of heroin, every time you watch that porn, every time you eat that cookie with all that sugar or that cupcake. Your brain fundamentally is getting rewired for that reward and is getting scarred every time you do it. Now, the good news is that can be healed, and we're figuring out how to do that. So if there's any hope in the conversation, just put us back to the day when we didn't know what cancer was, right? And we didn't know, and we still don't, but we know what it is, but we're still trying to figure out how to cure it. Or AIDS, right? Yeah. Everybody was dying from AIDS. Nobody really knew why. Everybody thought it was, it's bad choices, right? And it's, something that God is giving us. Well, fundamentally, I don't know what side of the fence you're on, but it's a reaction, and it's something that's happening within the body. And the more that we found out about the science and what the body is doing, what the cells are doing, we were able to find a cure, right? And we can keep people from going to and dying from AIDS now. This is absolutely the same space that we're in right now with addiction, right? People becoming addicted, that is choice, that's parenting, that's everything else, right? That's a harder one to tough.
Yeah.
To have a world where nobody ever gets addicted. I hope for that day, but I think we're closer to the day within the next decade or sooner where we can say, if you become addicted, we know how to get it healed so that you will never relapse again.
Wow. And that could be such a powerful thing, because you're right, dealing with getting people to stay away in the first place, which might happen as more and more awareness and things come out about it, and more understanding of what actually happens to your brain when you're doing these things. But being able to support people on the other side of it and get people clean and get people free of it, I'm excited to see that, because imagine what's going to happen when then all those people, that many more, like you mentioned, only 2% of people with an addiction problem ending up getting clean and staying clean, because most of them never get a solution in the first place. Imagine as more and more people out there able to share their stories, share their experiences, and help bring other people through to the other side with them. I think that's going to be amazing. And as well, even on the other side of the things, with the family's support. You mentioned that most of the time someone's relying on that support network of their friends and family. That's who you spend most of your time with. So naturally, that's going to be a huge factor, but they have no idea what to do. I'd like to ask you a little more on that, because one of the things I loved about your summit actually was the difference in that it talked about really talking to people who are not only dealing with addiction, but who are those family members and friends. What do they do, and information for them. So have you seen a shift? Are there more tools and things out there for the family members who have loved ones suffering with addiction?
Yeah, there are tools, and it's kind of like what you talked about in the beginning, where every tool, it's tougher right now because every tool is essentially presented as the solution, and like Al-Anon, right? A lot of people go to Al-Anon, but Al-Anon for some people is a really tough program, and there are parents who will say, "I am never going to go to Al-Anon. I just will never go to Al-Anon. It's not for me. It doesn't match up with my philosophy," or whatever the case is. Fundamentally, I think the important thing for family members and loved ones, and this is after talking to Gabor Mate, this is after talking to Dr. Shefali, who said, "I'm not an addiction expert, but I'm a parenting expert." And so it ends up that she is an addiction expert because so much of parenting causes trauma on the child, right?
Yeah.
And we often go back to our childhood as to the reasons why we feel the way we do right now. So for family members and loved ones, it still at the end of the day, if you are dealing with a loved one who has, pretty serious addiction problems, there is a definite need for professional help. And so I would seek that professional help in the form of psychiatry, to help understand and help that individual understand and work through the trauma and the emotional pains that they have. It was a really interesting interview because Tucker Max, who is known as like the party guy of this generation, right? I talked to him and he's like, "No, I don't suffer from addiction or anything, but I do." His behavior is a different type of extreme behavior, right? At least it was back then. And he was very open and shared about, trauma that he experienced as a child and with his parents who were highly dysfunctional, but highly successful, yet highly dysfunctional and not good parents. And he talked about a time when he was 2 years old and his parents were arguing and his mother had him on her hip with a belt that had a really big buckle loop or something coming out of it. And the more she argued with her husband, Tucker kept sliding and she wasn't paying attention. And his skin as a 2-year-old got caught on that buckle.
Oh,
And the more he slid, the more it was pulling and tearing at the skin. And he remembers that as an experience where essentially she was saying, she doesn't even acknowledge or know that I'm here right now, right? And that caused a lot of trauma for him. So coming to terms with that trauma is a big step. It takes a while, right? The other thing is, parents and loved ones, a lot of times we will impose our concerns and our fears about society on our loved one. And Dr. Shefali talks about that in her book, Conscious Parenting. And I would look her up
oh,
as,
she's amazing. I love her.
yeah, if you're a parent, I would definitely look her up because she's talks about conscious parenting and, the trauma that we potentially impose on our children and our loved ones because we have certain fears that we experience and traumas that we experience as a child, right? Maybe we think that them being a super successful athlete is what's going to make them successful in life. So we have the best intentions for them, but maybe they have no interest in sports and they really want to play the piano instead, right? But we don't hear that. We force them down a path. And Anna David said, she was raised by super strict Jewish parents who they just wanted her to be a doctor or a lawyer or something else. And all she wanted to do was write. And so she ties that. So it's really creating an environment of absolute confidence and trust. And Gabor Mate talked about that. We have the need as individuals to attach, right? And so if we don't feel safe and if we don't feel like our parents or our friends or our loved ones understand who we are, that we can be totally true with who we are with them in a safe environment without judgment, and we can get support. If we don't find it there, we'll seek it somewhere else, right? And that's the power of community. So I would say, really, you need good listening skills, right? You shouldn't be prescriptive. You should have a line of questioning and inquiry and love with the one that you're concerned about that helps you understand them more, right? It's just like sales. The more you understand about the person you're trying to sell to, the better you're going to be able to sell to them, right? And so the same thing goes with your children, with your spouse, is creating that environment where we're not trying to prescribe blindly. Just choose better, just do better.
Yep.
Why are you doing that? I don't understand what you're doing that. A better question is, how are you feeling? Why are you feeling that way? Right? How can I help? I'm here for you. And that's one thing that we learned, Kevin Briggs talks about that quite a bit. So I would look up Kevin Briggs, and he's got a course on the listening skills that you would need as well. But also nutrition is a big part of it. If you look at, because our nutrition feeds our frontal lobe. Like most of the energy and the nutrition that we get from the frontal lobe, which is the parenting side of the brain, right, which helps us take and make good logical decisions, comes from the microbiomes in our gut. So whatever you're putting there is going to feed the frontal lobe. That's 90% of the energy is tapped into our microbiomes from our gut, from our frontal lobe. So if you're putting sugar, empty calories into your gut, you're not going to have a lot of resource up here, a lot of energy to be able to deal with the anxiety or the stresses or anything else. So I would look at nutrition. I would look at exercise, just fundamentally eating better. And, it's Beth Frates talks about that as well. So we are going to come out. We're collecting all the interviews, and we're going to put it in a structured, deliverable format for people to go through and say, all right, here's essentially the sequence for either myself or a family member to go through for us to get at least on stable ground, right? It's not going to happen overnight, but at least here.
And it is that process. And I love what you're saying, where if you are a family member and you have a loved one struggling, it's supportive. It's not just giving them what to do, but maybe helping them set up an exercise regime where you walk together in the morning, or help maybe eat a meal with them every now and then, make sure it's a healthier meal, and do that support and be open for them. And I know how hard that can be. I know how hard it can be when you have an intention and you're in a certain role. And especially when so many of your beliefs as that parent or loved one might be that they could just choose, why are they choosing that over us? And that hurt comes out.
Yep.
What would you recommend for people in being with, on that side of things with families and friends and loved ones, when you see them making these decisions that hurt them? How do you try to just stay supportive, loving, and accepting to not push them away?
So, I mean, it's so hard, right? Because you just super love these people, right? And it's almost an impossibility not to get emotionally engaged.
Yeah.
But from what people have told me, all the experts have told me, and even people who are in, successful recovery, this is not about them, right? Your loved one almost doesn't see you as part of the equation, right? So this is not them saying, I'm going to get back at you. This is their brain driving them and creating a behavior system that is driving towards that certain reward. The brain fundamentally, at the end of the day, is driving every behavior, every emotion towards that addictive reward, whether it be sex, whether it be cookies, whether it be, porn or heroin or whatever the case is, right? It could be working, right? It doesn't necessarily always have to be a super detrimental thing, but it could be work. It could be exercise. Those are healthier, but at the end of the day, addiction, true addiction, like extreme addiction, is whenever you seek that reward regardless of the consequence, right? So somebody who works super hard and is super successful, often people put on a pedestal, but maybe they've been through like 10 different divorces, right? Maybe their kids hate them. Is that worth it? I mean, that's a consequence that is, an addictive consequence, in my opinion, right? Exercise, like we exercise, but we don't want to go out to eat with our family. We want to stay super disciplined with our nutrition, and we won't interact, and we'll get people frustrated. So you really have to look at what are your priorities. But ultimately, an answer to your question is, first of all, you have to understand that it's almost always not about you, right? This is nothing personal. You're dealing essentially with a trigger system, and it's like a math problem, really. 1 + 1 = 2, and you're not in that 1 + 1, right? You may be a trigger to that. So I would say look at potentially, interactions that you have, and then how they behave after the interactions. If they're behaving negatively, then you want to try to change the interaction. But the other thing is that there is a huge just population of collateral damage around the addict, right? Families and members and loved ones who quit their jobs, who give everything they have financially, who deplete themselves emotionally, and are essentially walking corpses emotionally from this. And so you have to work on keeping yourself healthy as well. Like, you have to take care of yourself. You have to eat right. You have to exercise. Somebody said, I asked them in the interview, and I think it was Rory, and I said, what is the best advice that you can give to somebody trying to give advice to an addict? And he said, ask yourself one question: am I following the same advice?
Oh, wow. Yep.
If you're not, you're totally hosed. You've already lost, right? If you're telling your kid not to smoke and you're smoking, you're hosed, right? If you're telling your kid not to overeat or not to have that cookie and you're shoving a bunch of cupcakes in your face, you're screwed, right? So you have to lead by example as well. But it's a tough battle. We all know that. So you have to make sure that you are prepared to win and you're in shape to manage the emotional highs, the emotional lows, the physical highs, the physical lows that are going to come with being somebody who is trying to support and heal a loved one.
So you've got to put on your oxygen mask before you put it on a loved one.
Exactly. Yeah. Really good example. Yeah, exactly. You really do. And you try not to take it personally.
Yeah. And I get it's so hard because it's hard not to take it personally. It's hard not to look at it as what did I do that led to this? And that's why I feel so many people, so many friends and family members, and I've seen it with people in my own life, where you almost try to guilt. You think that guilting the person into looking at the damage that you've done, or trying to get them through logic with it, it's so much more than that. It's just, you got to support, be an example, and help them work through it. And I love what you said, where it's about listening. It's probably the hardest thing to do. I mean, in any relationship, we know this
it's
with
a skill set.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I did something with my son, I've got 4 boys, and my last boy, I'm trying to motivate him, and I'm trying to, get him to step up a little bit in some of his game and stuff. And I was using his older brothers as the example, like Gabe did it this way and Ethan did it this way. And, I didn't realize I was just causing an extreme amount of trauma for the kid, because he finally looked at me and he said, "Dad, I'm Hayden. I'm not Ethan. I'm not Gabe." Right. So, and if you look at the mini documentary that we did on Malcolm Graham, and I can share that video with you if you don't have it, so you can post it. But Malcolm is a kid that went to Bishop O'Dowd High School in Oakland, was a top, high school athlete, football player, got an injury, was prescribed 120 oxycodone, and refilled whenever he wanted it. So essentially he became addicted to prescription opiates. And about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, he died of a heroin overdose. And his mom, if you watch the video, his mom said, I can walk around and I can look people in the eye that are suffering, and I can say, I see you. She said, I did not see Malcolm until it was too late. And so what does that mean? Are you really seeing the loved one in your life? Do you see them, right? Not the behavior, but are you looking in the eyes and you still see the child or the kid that you had hopes and dreams for? Because that can all still be there, right? But you have to see them. You have to understand the pain. You have to understand that this is real pain. This is real suffering. This is real emotion, right? That they're going through. And if you see them for what they are, that can make a huge difference, because we can go through the emotions, but we can be present, but not presence with purpose. And there's a big difference, right? We can be in the same room. We can have dinner. We can do those things. But if you're presence with purpose, that means you are engaged and you're trying to understand and support and love that human being.
That's incredible. Well, the power of even just someone feeling seen and heard. I'm sensing that theme. It's listening and support, and just having them know that you're here for them regardless. You understand they're hurting, and you're here for them. You're here with them, and you're really going through it with them, whether we think we're separate or not. Like you mentioned, the collateral damage is just huge. Lots of people for the one person. And so it really does take a group effort. And I love what you've been sharing. And so if someone wants to stay up to date with your, not only just your project, but as you release those resources from your summit, is going to your website, following the blog, the best way to do that?
Yes.
Perfect. And that's at the Clear Health Technologies. And what I'll do is I'll post a link for that below. Erik, I just want to thank you so much for being here with me and doing this today. It's awesome and important work that you're doing. And any way I can support, I'm here with you.
Well, you know what? I mean, it really means a lot to me, Roger, that, you asked for the time. I want to be there and be a resource because a lot of people way smarter than me that happily jumped in this pool with me and offered their resources, their expertise. I am, I'm the curious one. I'm not the expert. Um, and there's a lot, and you can probably hear it. There's a lot we don't know yet,
Yeah.
but we know what questions to ask, right? We know the answers that we're trying to find, and we also know that the science and the technology is there to do so. So even 5 years ago, probably this wouldn't have been possible because the wearables weren't at the point where I mean, the goal here is for everyone who wants it to have the solution. It'll be affordable, it'll be accessible, and it will heal and it will cure and it will create community around community that is really not ever been done before. And it's going to create purpose. And so we're not only going to heal people, but we're going to put people who are being healed in a situation where they can live their most meaningful life,
Mm.
right? And they're just not shells walking around. They are just absolute atom bombs of potential.
Wow. And really giving people that hope that there is another side and there is a freedom. And I think that's a word that's elusive to people when they're suffering with addiction or coming through it or coming out the other side. It's that one day there can actually be a freedom from this. You can live a vibrant, healthy, full life and just stick to it and keep doing it, keep going through your path. And people like you who are curious, and hopefully more and more people become curious right along with you. Imagine, yes, 5 years ago, this wasn't even possible conversation. Imagine 5 years from now, what we're going to be talking about. It's an exciting future.
Yeah, I mean, it's real. I mean, it really is real. I mean, this will and can happen. So if you're looking at your loved one in the eye who is suffering from addiction, the question you should ask is, how can I heal you? Right? Just acknowledge that they're sick, they're broken, and how can I heal you? And so if you engage with me in this curiosity path and this knowledge path, then we will find the answers together. And ultimately, out of everything that I'm trying to throw at everybody, you'll find a little piece here, a little piece there that can make an absolute difference. So, Roger, I really, really appreciate you. This is
I
super.
I appreciate you. What you're doing is amazing, and I'm looking forward to see where it goes.
Yeah, always here for you if you need anything. And thanks to your audience for listening. And please reach out with any questions you might have.
To get access to all of the free videos and interviews, visit sobrietystartshere.com.